Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joseph Karanko, and I am part of the Eastside Professional class or Eastside Skills Professional class. And today, for my presentation, I am going to be doing how does tornadoes affect air quality. So this is a topic I'm very passionate about, especially when it comes to tornadoes as a meteorology major. And one of the things that I was very curious about is how does it affect our air quality, especially when it comes to environmental science. It is something that I am very intrigued by. And what I figured out is that when tornadoes are dispersed and they are made, and when they go through towns and they go through cities and even when they go through forests and other sites, they disperse aerosols, chemicals, and asbestos. Aerosols, you'll mostly find that in towns when a tornado is forming affecting the town. That's usually when it comes to buildings, old buildings. Chemicals, that's a very specific kind of topic, and that's usually where you'll find where a tornado hits a Superfund site, where I will be getting into later. And asbestos is actually as effective when it comes to tornadoes dispersing air quality. And one of the ways that how it is effective is that it also is in buildings, and aerosols is more like particulate matter in the air, while asbestos is more like the thin fibers of like materials such as like insulation inside walls, the wood panels and roofs, and even like the little tiny fibers of wood in between your walls. And this is how it really affects our air quality. So, some limitations of my topic of how does tornadoes affect the air quality is that even though we do have a lot of data and research behind it, we don't have any conclusive proof or connection that air quality and tornadoes are connected. And one of the ways how it is not connected is that we don't have a perfect obtained experiment scenario. And what I mean by this is that the atmosphere is such a vast and hard thing to control and measure. And even though we do have perfect instruments of how to calculate what is in our atmosphere and what is wrong with our air quality, we do not know what causes most of or we do not know how does tornadoes affect our air quality, mostly due to the fact that our air quality is always affected by numerous amount of things such as urban towns, such as pollution, smog, name it. Air quality could be easily affected by anything, and even by population. And so, tornadoes, it is a very hard foundation of how it affects our air quality. But I will show y'all in this presentation that tornadoes do lead to some kind of effect in our atmosphere and our air quality. So, why you should care about how tornadoes affect our air quality is that even though not a lot of people are affected by tornadoes, like when mostly people think of natural disasters, it is usually just 100 people out of a million kind of casualties. But when a tornado does do damage to a community, it doesn't just affect their housing or affect their just financial status. It affects their building, their emotional attachment to it, and it affects it in various amount of ways, such as buildings when they are destroyed by tornadoes. Most buildings are filled with pollutants such as air or asbestos, and some of that affects our air quality. And mostly the buildings that you will see that will affect our air quality in our presentation or in my presentation is that of old buildings before the EPA regulation law, where old buildings before this law and this quality management is that most of these buildings are made with asbestos, and that asbestos could affect our air or could affect us negative, or could affect our health negatively, and it affects our air quality. And one of the ways how this could affect our health negatively is asbestoitis, mesothelioma, and lung cancer in the worst scenario. And because of these tornadoes, these do make a damage to our not just our community, but also to our lung health. And also, I will be presenting in this presentation is that air quality pollution can increase meteorological activity in a way. So as I said before of Superfund sites, I didn't really explain it in the previous introduction slide, and I want to go further into depth of what are Superfund sites. So based on a peer review article by Summers and other authors who made this, where it's called Asbestos Exposure and Natural Disaster. Superfund sites are usually hazardous contaminated sites. So one of the example or some examples of this is dumps, pollution dumps, mining sites, and even water purification plants. One example is like the one down the road from Corpus Christi, and these are known for as Superfund sites because they are the most vulnerable to tornadoes, and those are usually distributed among the central U.S. And one way how these are vulnerable is that when a tornado does go through these Superfund sites, it releases all the chemicals, all the asbestos, all the trash, and all the aerosols inside those Superfund sites. And that, like I said before in the previous slide, that causes a negative health effect to our lungs and also to our community. So, this is an example by my peer review article by Summers. And these are some of the highest exposure to tornadoes. So even though we might just think like, oh yes, it is very little, like 62 out of 1,364, these do lead to negative health effects to our community, and not just health effects, but also financially, as I will explain in the next slide. So even though some people might say like, oh, the Superfund sites aren't that big to manage because Superfund sites only carry like there's a very low number of Superfund sites. However, in our previous Superfund site where an EF4 tornado attacked uh, a attacked Tar Creek site at in Oklahoma on May 10th, 2008, it did damage it over $40 million in our finance, and this is because when that tornado, the EF4 tornado, attacked it, it did release a bunch of chemical substances since it was a mining site, and most of those substances spread across the acres in Oklahoma. And one of the substances was piker or chot, which is very hard to scrub off, and it does lead to health effects such as mesothelioma and lung cancer. So it is a very big deal. Even though Superfund sites are very small, we do see the effects of it, not just financially, but also health wise. And as I said before, several of these extreme weather events do affect our Superfund toxic waste sites. And most meteorological events do cause up to 25% of our chemical damage within United States. So, furthermore, of how the tornadoes affect our air quality is asbestos. So, asbestos is mostly, like I said before, the insulation, the thin fibers, and the air that is very toxic and very not healthy to breathe in. So, when these tornadoes do destroy buildings, they cause asbestos in the air, and that could lead to asbestoitis. And inhaling most of these asbestos, especially after a tornado, could lead to negative health effects such as asbestoitis, mesothelioma, and lung cancer stated by the EPA, and also lungcancer.org or lungcancer.gov. And one of the ways how asbestos does affect our air quality is that when these tornadoes do damage these old buildings and even the newer buildings we have today, it does lead to negative health effects within or negative health effects within our communities, and it does lead to negative effects within our atmosphere, leading to our air quality being very, very, I wouldn't say toxic, but very harsh to breathe in or very troublesome to inhale and breathe in. So, furthermore, of how does tornadoes affect our air quality is through aerosols. So, aerosol is usually the particulate matter in the air, and aerosols is very hard to get out of our atmosphere, especially when coming to air quality. Aerosols are very minute and very tiny to the eye, and aerosols do lead to, I would say, lung problems within our community. However, aerosols within our air quality have shown that they kind of agitate our atmosphere in a meteorology sense. So, one way how we found this out, or how I found this out, is by Daniel Rosenfield and Thomas L. Bell. They found out in a study where they did a 13-day experiment of tracking the weather of particulate matter and thunderstorms and tropical storms. And they also did a case file or a case study where they were basically measuring it from the 1980s all the way to 2010. And what they found out is that weekly cycle and aerosol impacts on storms depend on mostly the aerosols. So basically saying that aerosol impacts do make an impact on storms if it is depending on the aerosol amount. And we did find out that aerosols suppress cloud convection in a dry condition, but also agitate the cloud convection in a moist condition. So it can either increase our flow of air or increase our meteorology storm. So aerosols can either increase or decrease our cloud convection, and aerosols are a factor in our air quality. So therefore, aerosols can produce tornadoes and can produce more storms within our atmosphere. This is a study stated by Daniel Rosenfield and Thomas L. Bell. And what they figured out is that in their data, particulate matter does correlate with their storms, hailstorms, and tornadoes. And what they found out is that throughout their 13-week experiment, that tornadoes, even though they are higher significantly than particulate matter also decreases with tornadoes. So we do have a correlation, even though some people might say that, like, oh, aerosols are not that much of affecting towards the atmosphere or to our air quality. But based on this graph, we do have some data and we do have some concrete evidence that particulate matter does affect tornadoes, and therefore air quality does affect tornadoes. Furthermore, stated by Fan, an author for a peer-reviewed article, "A Dominant Role by Vertical Wind Shear in Regulating Aerosol Effects and Convective Cloud Currents." He figured out throughout case 4 and case 6 that most of the aerosols is either agitating the cloud convection or decreasing the cloud convection. And what he figured out in the case 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, and 8 is that there wasn't no concrete data to figure or to support that finding, but he did figure it out that most of the polluted water that was infected with aerosols and particulate matter and chemicals did affect our atmosphere in a way. So overall, aerosols do affect our atmosphere, and therefore air quality does affect our atmosphere and could produce tornadoes. Natural hazards such as Superfund sites are active and can be hit by tornadoes, and that could affect our air quality by dispersing aerosols, chemicals, and even asbestos. And we also figured out that aerosols can produce a cycle within our atmosphere because of air quality. This means that throughout our atmosphere and throughout time, if our air quality isn't treated properly, it can produce much more tornadic activity and more storm like activity within our cities and within US. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you all have a great day, and I want to appreciate you for listening. And I hope you bear with me with this project. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. And here are my citations.